Russia's President Vladimir Putin is witnessing his worst nightmare come to life. As his war with Ukraine devolves into a complete catastrophe, with disastrous losses of troops and equipment, his carefully constructed reputation has also begun to crumble. The former KGB officer no longer commands the fear and respect he once did, and Putin's paranoia is rising as even his most loyal allies begin to turn against him. Now, even Russian journalists report that the president is growing increasingly fearful of either being ousted from power or assassinated, and may be resorting to increasingly drastic and damaging measures to maintain his grip on power, sending Russia right back to the Dark Ages in the process. To understand exactly what Putin may have planned, we first have to take a major leap back in time, all the way back to the 16th century and the days of Tsar Ivan IV, more commonly known as Ivan the Terrible, who ruled Russia from 1547 through to his death in 1584. Ivan was a deeply paranoid and unpredictable ruler. The early stages of his reign were relatively stable, but after a decade on the throne, two life-changing events completely altered his outlook and approach forever. The first of those events came in 1560, when Ivan's beloved wife Anastasia died. Despite no evidence at the time, Ivan strongly suspected that Anastasia had been poisoned by his enemies. Years later, scientists actually examined the Tsarina's bones and found unusually high levels of mercury, suggesting that Ivan's paranoia may not have been misplaced. A few years later, in 1564, one of Ivan's closest friends, Prince Kurbsky, betrayed him. In 1558, Ivan had launched an ill-advised attempt to conquer the Baltic territory of Livonia. Kurbsky initially assisted him, but after falling out with the Tsar and fearing repression, he defected to Lithuania and eventually led a joint Polish-Lithuanian army against Russian forces, handing Ivan a crushing and humiliating military defeat in the process. The impact of these events took a toll on Ivan's psyche. He left Moscow and traveled to the town of Alexandrov to the north, where he wrote a letter announcing his intention to abdicate the throne. However, the court of noblemen and clergymen he left in charge was unable to rule effectively in his absence and begged him to reconsider. He agreed, but with one all-important condition: he must be given absolute power, including the ability to seize the lands of anyone who betrayed him and execute anyone he suspected of treason. The court was desperate, so it agreed to Ivan's terms. And so began the Oprichnina, a dark and gruesome period in Russian history in which the full extent of Ivan's innate fear and paranoia was unleashed. This involved the division of Russia into two administrative areas, one of which, the Oprichnina, was ruled entirely by Ivan however he saw fit, while the other fell under the control of the nobility. To cement his control over the Oprichnina, Ivan ordered the formation of Russia's first secret police, known as the Oprichniki, a 6,000-man strong private army that effectively served as Ivan's personal bodyguards and enforcers. Dressed in black and given carte blanche to torture or kill anyone who even as much as looked at Ivan the wrong way, these secret police officers soon earned a fearsome reputation, to the point at which locals would quite literally flee their homes if they heard the Oprichniki were in the area. The reason for that is simple. The Oprichniki were incredibly brutal. Some of their favorite execution methods included boiling people alive, impaling them on spikes, or tearing them from limb with the help of horses. The officers even famously rode around with severed dogs' heads stuck to their saddles, a symbol of their responsibility to sniff out and eradicate treason wherever it might be found. Eventually, Ivan wanted to extend his power even further, beyond the established boundaries of the Oprichnina and into the country's second-largest city, Novgorod. He had become convinced that the city's leaders and most powerful citizens were plotting against him, so he ordered a bloody siege of Novgorod in 1570. Members of the clergy were rounded up and beaten to death, while religious buildings like churches and monasteries were ransacked. Merchants, nobles, and other officials were also tortured and killed in horrific ways, and even their wives and children weren't shown any mercy, with many of them being rounded up and thrown into a nearby river. All of this brutality and bloodshed came about because of the fears and insecurities of a single man. Fast forward to today, and the echoes of the past are clear to see. Putin may not be a czar or emperor in the official sense, but certainly has a history of acting like one. He's repeatedly defied and rewritten Russia's laws and even the country's constitution in order to remain in power year after year. He's also shown the same ruthlessness as Ivan the Terrible in ordering the invasion of a neighboring nation, and is now beginning to display the same neuroses that gave Ivan his terrible moniker to begin with. There are three core reasons behind this. Firstly, and most obviously, the war is going incredibly badly for Russia. The latest estimates suggest that Russia has suffered well over 1 million total casualties in Ukraine, including hundreds of thousands of dead. The country has also lost a staggering amount of equipment, from tanks and infantry fighting vehicles to expensive air defense systems and state-of-the-art radars. With every passing month, more reports emerge of devastating losses for the Kremlin's forces, with literally tens of thousands of new casualties. That might not matter all that much if the country was actually managing to make vital gains on the ground, capturing important towns and cities, smashing Ukraine's defensive lines, and pushing onward towards a clear and inevitable victory. But that's not happening either. Instead, Russia's rate of progress has dramatically slowed down in many frontline locations, with thousands of soldiers losing their lives for only the tiniest patches of land. In some regions, Ukraine's forces have even managed to slowly turn the tide, retaking lost land and pushing the Russians back. As a result, Russia's casualty rate has finally begun to surpass its recruitment rate, with the country increasingly unable to bring in enough new soldiers to replenish its ranks. In other words, Russia's army is no longer expanding, but diminishing, and that represents an abject failure for the man in charge of it all, Putin himself. The second big issue is economic. Russia's war with Ukraine was supposed to be over and done with in a matter of weeks. Moscow's forces were expected to rampage over Ukraine's defensive lines and raise the Russian flag over the streets of Kyiv with ease. The operation would still have cost money, but would have potentially brought in much more revenue in the long term as Russia began to exploit its newfound territories. That didn't happen. Instead, the war has raged on for several years now, and the Kremlin has been forced to spend billions of dollars to keep it going. It's lost an incalculable amount of income as a result of sanctions and faces a spiraling labor crisis, coupled with the effect of up to 1 million intelligent, skilled Russians leaving the country and opting to start new lives elsewhere. The country's financial burden has only increased as the war has progressed, with Russia not only having to spend more on the likes of manufacturing drones and covering the extortionate cost of recruitment, but also suffering direct economic hits in the form of Ukrainian drone strikes on its most valuable infrastructure: oil refineries, pipelines, ports, and storage facilities. These attacks have become more frequent and more impactful as Ukraine's domestic defense industry has strengthened, leading to even greater losses for its opponent. This has most directly affected the Russian public, with the general population suffering a severe drop in quality of life and having to spend much more of their meager income on things like fuel for their cars and groceries for their families. Finally, the third big reason why Putin is panicking is that this war has shattered the myth of Russian competence and superiority that he himself worked so hard to create. For years, Putin and his closest allies built up Russia's reputation as one of the strongest nations on Earth, with the second mightiest military after the United States and almost unimaginable levels of power and influence. Even relatively strong nations grew to fear the Russian threat, which often led them doing exactly what the Kremlin wanted. Many countries also relied heavily on Russia for their own defenses, fostering relationships with Putin and investing heavily in Russian or Soviet tanks, vehicles, aircraft, and defenses. This is why, when the war began, so many analysts expected that a Russian victory was inevitable, and that the Kremlin's war machine would ruthlessly sweep across Ukraine with ease. Instead, the machine has been reduced to a spluttering wreck, chugging along with all the efficiency of a 50-year-old tractor. Russia's finest tanks have been reduced to smoldering wrecks. Its air force was never able to achieve superiority, despite starting the war with an immense advantage, and its so-called world-beating army has failed again and again to achieve almost any of its stated objectives. As a result, the Kremlin has lost its fear factor, and people no longer look at Moscow or at Putin the way they once did. Now, before we dig into what this all means, If this is the kind of insight you want more of, make sure you're subscribed to the Military Show. We break it down like this every week. Now, during the early stages of the war with Ukraine, Russian officials largely toed the line and didn't openly criticize the Kremlin's decisions or call out Putin's perceived failures. As time has passed, however, the situation has changed quite dramatically, with increasing numbers of high-ranking military members and Moscow elites airing their frustrations in more ways than one. The most dramatic example of this was the Wagner Group mutiny, in which one of Putin's closest confidants, Yevgeny Prigozhin, turned against him and even led a short-lived march on Moscow. Prigozhin ultimately paid for this with his life, perishing in highly suspicious circumstances in a plane crash soon after. Nobody wants to become the next Prigozhin, and there hasn't been any other high-profile attempt at ousting Putin from his position. At the same time, the president's power has quite clearly diminished. Hardline Russian nationalists who once adored him have labeled him a coward and called for him to step down. His approval rating with the Russian public has slipped to an all-time low, and rumors have steadily begun to swirl that even the wealthy oligarchs and loyal allies who have remained silently supportive all this time are approaching their limits. Putin is aware of this, and just like Ivan the Terrible, he's begun to fall victim to his own paranoia. We saw the first signs of this in late 2024 and throughout 2025, when the president carried a Stalin-style purge, ousting large numbers of Russian generals, high-ranking officers, ministers, and other elites. Many were accused of corruption and arrested, while others were made to quietly retire or simply vanish from public life in strange circumstances. Some, like the former transport minister, Roman Starovoyt, were even found dead. The entire episode revealed incredible insight into the president's perturbed state of mind, as he systematically went about removing experienced and once trusted people from positions of power, often replacing them with people who were widely seen as less competent but more loyal. And it doesn't actually seem to have done much to assuage Putin's panic, as a May 2026 report revealed that the president actively fears he could be killed or removed from power at any moment. The report was compiled by an unnamed European Union country and published on the independent Russian investigative journalist platform Important Stories on May 4. It states that the Kremlin has entered a state of increased alarm since March 2026, with Putin himself growing increasingly worried about people plotting against him. To be more precise, the president is allegedly concerned about drones being used to assassinate him on behalf of members of Moscow's political elite. As a direct consequence, the Federal Protective Service, FSO, which is the organization tasked with protecting the president and other state officials, has been ordered to significantly strengthen Putin's security. All visitors to the presidential administration, for example, must now undergo 2 levels of verification, including a complete inspection by FSO employees. Putin is also reportedly visiting fewer places, and neither he nor his closest family members spend any time in their usual residences in the Moscow region or in Valdai. Instead, according to the report, Putin now spends much of his time hiding out in reinforced bunkers, with the Russian media using pre-recorded videos to make it look like he's out and about more than he actually is. In addition, communication networks in certain areas of Moscow are being periodically disconnected, and Putin doesn't intend to visit any sites of military infrastructure in 2026, despite visiting several such sites in 2025. The FSO also controls and coordinates all information and media publications related to the president, effectively dictating what the media can and cannot say about him. On top of all of this, government officials and employees working in proximity to Putin aren't allowed to use their own mobile phones or access the internet in his presence. They're also banned from using public transport, being made to rely exclusively on FSO transport to get around. Some, like Putin's personal chefs, photographers, and security guards, have even had surveillance systems installed in their own homes so FSO agents can keep an eye on them and ensure they're not plotting against the president. Centuries have passed since the days of Ivan the Terrible, but so many of the same features of his reign can be seen once again with Putin. They may not be as openly brutal or bloodthirsty, but the FSO is effectively operating like a modern-day Oprichnina, protecting Putin at all costs while sniffing out possible signs of treason or conspiracy against him. And they may have found their first big-name culprit, the former defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. The report notes that Shoigu, who currently serves as the Secretary of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, continues to hold great influence among the military command and has been linked with a potential coup. This may partially explain why Shoigu's former first deputy, Ruslan Salikov, was arrested in early March, indirectly weakening Shoigu's position, with some experts believing he may be next in line to be prosecuted and purged. Meanwhile, Putin has also ordered the FSO to strengthen protections for 10 high-ranking Russian generals who are seen as his most loyal allies, including the first Deputy Chief of the General Staff, Colonel General Nikolai Bogdanovsky, and Deputy Chief of the General Staff, Colonel General Sergei Istrakov. In short, while the president appears to have a small circle of trust, he seems increasingly wary of anyone outside of that circle and has few qualms about prosecuting and punishing anyone who might show even the slightest hint of dissent. Should he continue down this path, some analysts argue Putin could bring about a 21st century Oprichnina that could eventually bring about the end of his time in power and perhaps even his life. One of those experts is Roman Arnin, an investigative journalist and the founder of Important Stories. He argues that the war is entering a new phase, not on the front lines, but among Russian security apparatus clans for the throne of a weakening dictator. Looking ahead to what comes next, Arnin suggests two potential scenarios, which may overlap and even occur simultaneously. The first is that Putin will continue to grant more power to his FSO enforcers, as well as the National Guard, who could even develop into a Russian equivalent of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps (IRGC), tasked with carrying out what Arnin calls unprecedented repression of Russian society to crack down on any possible plots, conspiracies, or rebellions. The second scenario Arnin envisions is a new time of troubles, which was the name given to the period of political and social crisis in Russia that began at the end of the 16th century and into the start of the 17th century. This period involved political anarchy, civil war, foreign invasion, and famine, and many historians argue it was a direct consequence of Ivan the Terrible's Oprichnina policies. They fear that history may about to repeat itself as Putin grows increasingly desperate and paranoid and stops at nothing to remain in control of the country. All the signs are there. Not only is Putin purging officials and consolidating his most loyal forces around him, but he's also massively expanded the power of the Federal Security Service, FSB, the modern-day equivalent of the Soviet-era KGB. Meanwhile, while there haven't been yet any recorded executions in the streets, Putin's enforcers have begun arresting and torturing innocent civilians. In February 2026, for example, reports emerge of a translator named Svetlana Savalyeva who fell in love with a Ukrainian soldier and tried to meet him. She was captured and brutally beaten in order to make her confess to a crime she hadn't committed, trying to join the armed forces of Ukraine so that she could be charged with treason. She's one of an increasing number of female political prisoners convicted on trumped-up charges of terrorism, treason, and extremism. Russian political scientist Vladimir Putin believes that the levels of repression and control being enforced by the Putin regime are growing dangerously close to those seen under Soviet leader Joseph Stalin during the Great Terror. Arnin, meanwhile, is looking even further back in the history books, stating that if and when Putin's enforcers eventually begin to turn against not just members of the public, but those in the highest positions of power, the risk of a coup and a new time of troubles will become even more real. Putin wanted to be remembered as Russia's modern-day Peter the Great. He's more likely to go down as the new Ivan the Terrible. Now, you can learn more about the president's dramatic downfall in this video, which explores how Russia is headed for a humiliating tactical defeat. Or check out this video for another look back through the history books at how Russia may be about to suffer its third dramatic collapse. And finally, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more insightful analysis and breaking news reports from the Russia-Ukraine war.